The Young and the Restless spoilers shock. The whispers surrounding Billy's fate had been building for weeks, each conversation more pointed, more vicious, and more unavoidable than the last. Among fans, colleagues, and even the residents of Genoa City themselves, the question lingered like an unwelcome fog. Could Billy truly be nearing the end of his road on The Young and the Restless? The irony was impossible to ignore. He was both one of the show's most vital fixtures and one of its most divisive presences. His reckless decisions, his refusal to grow up, and his habit of sabotaging himself and those around him had earned him little sympathy. The mounting criticism painted him as a man impossible to defend, and yet, even his detractors could not have anticipated the shocking twist that would leave his family reeling and the entire canvas of the show shaken to its core. The accident came with no warning. One moment, Billy was storming out of a meeting, brimming with his usual defiance and venom, leaving behind fractured relationships and bitter words. The next, word spread across Genoa City like wildfire that a terrible crash had left him clinging to life. For Jill, the matriarch, who had always alternated between fury and unconditional devotion to her son, the call from the hospital was a dagger to the heart. The words were delivered clinically, but their weight was unbearable. Billy was in critical condition, and his survival was uncertain. The very thought that she might be summoned to say goodbye to her son before she could even demand answers or hurl blame left Jill breathless. She rushed to the hospital with urgency only a mother could summon, her mind racing back through the long and tortuous history of Billy's missteps, his addictions, his defiance, but also his undeniable charm and the pieces of his heart that were pure and unbreakable. This was not how his story was supposed to end. When Jill arrived, the sterile corridors of the hospital echoed with her anguish. She demanded to see him, demanded explanations, but no amount of questions could slow the reality pressing down on her. Behind the doors of the intensive care unit, Billy's life was dangling by a thread, machines keeping rhythm for a body that had fought so many battles but seemed ill-prepared for this one. Jill collapsed into tears, her grief raw and uncontrolled, a mother's primal scream for the injustice of possibly losing her child. She had fought for him through rehab stints, through business feuds, through personal betrayals, and always believed, somehow, that he would turn a corner. To be robbed of that chance felt like a cruel joke. The Abbott family, too, descended on the hospital. Jack and Diane, their faces etched with disbelief, hurried to Jill's side, though even they were nearly paralyzed by the gravity of the situation. Jack, who had been forced to watch his brother spiral over and over again, could barely process what he saw. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Billy was a thorn in his side, yes, but he was also a piece of John Abbott's legacy, a brother who had always needed saving even when he didn't deserve it. Seeing Jill crumble was a reminder of the fragility of their dynasty, of how quickly triumph could be replaced by despair. Diane, torn between her loyalty to Jack and her shock at the calamity, offered support where she could, but even she felt the tremor that this event sent through every corner of their world. The hospital waiting room became the stage for grief, guilt, and unanswered questions. Jill's sobs filled the air, her hands covering her face as she cried out for reasons that no one could provide. Was it karma for his years of recklessness? Was it punishment for his inability to grow, for the hearts he had broken, the chaos he had created? Or was it something simpler, a cruel accident, indifferent to the moral judgments of his critics? To those around him, the lines blurred. The possibility of his death forced everyone, even those who despised him, to reckon with the truth. Really mattered, whether they wanted to admit it or not. His presence, for better or worse, had shaken them all. Yet beyond the tears and whispered prayers, a darker undercurrent began to creep in. Was the accident truly an accident? Billy's reckless driving and impulsive nature made it plausible, but whispers hinted at something more sinister, as if fate itself had grown weary of his antics. The speculation fanned out across Genoa City, rivals in business, enemies in love, even family members who had grown tired of his self-destruction could have had reason to want him gone. But for now, those questions had to be pushed aside as his family braced for the possibility that the next time they walked into his hospital room, it would be to say goodbye. For Jill, the weight was unbearable. She thought of the decades she had spent defending Billy, lifting him from the rubble of his own mistakes, shielding him even when others warned she was enabling him. She wondered if her fierce love had been both his salvation and his curse, allowing him to believe he could fall and always be caught. If he died now, those unanswered questions would haunt her forever. Her sobs, echoing down the corridor, became a soundtrack to the collective dread, a chilling reminder that sometimes even the strongest matriarch cannot protect her child from destiny. Jack, standing stiffly nearby, felt an old ache resurface, the pain of watching loved ones slip away too soon. The Abbott family had endured losses before, but this one cut differently. He couldn't help but feel guilt gnawing at him, had his constant criticism, his refusal to indulge Billy's immaturity, pushed his brother further into recklessness. Diane's hand on his shoulder grounded him momentarily, but her own eyes shimmered with unspoken truth that if Billy didn't make it, nothing in Genoa City would remain the same. And so the waiting game began. Doctors worked furiously behind closed doors, machines hummed, and loved ones braced for news that could shatter or save them. Each passing minute stretched into an eternity. For Jill, every second was another reminder that she might never again hear her son's voice, never again argue with him, never again believe in his potential to change. For Jack, it was a reckoning with the complicated love he bore for his brother, a relationship defined by rivalry, disappointment, and yet unshakable bonds. For the rest of Genoa City, it was the beginning of a reckoning, and that would determine not just Billy's fate, but the course of the Abbott family and their place in the world they had fought so hard to control. The tragedy looming over Billy's hospital bed was more than a personal crisis, it was a turning point. Whether he lived or died, nothing would ever be the same again. His accident had exposed the fractures within his family, forced long-buried resentments to the surface, and reminded everyone that even those they condemned could leave a void too large to fill. And as Jill's anguished cries filled the halls, the chilling truth became undeniable. Billy Abbott, the man everyone loved to hate, might have just become the most pivotal figure in Genoa City's story. The sterile walls of the hospital seemed to close in as the severity of Billy's condition came into focus. After hours of frantic waiting, the doctor finally delivered the words that no one wanted to hear. Billy was unconscious, undergoing emergency surgery, and his chance of survival was a mere 5%. The bluntness of the prognosis struck Jill like a hammer to the chest, and her scream echoed down the corridor, piercing the silence of the night. She collapsed against Jack, her body trembling with disbelief, as though her refusal to accept reality could somehow bend fate to her will. Jack, though shattered himself, held her upright, his jaw clenched, his eyes wet with grief he would not allow to break through. For a man who had endured so much loss, it felt cruel to be asked to prepare for this again, especially when it involved his brother, one who had always been a thorn, always a challenge, and yet always family. The accident had been gruesome, far worse than anyone imagined. Billy's head had borne the brunt of the impact, the trauma so severe that even the most optimistic medical minds hesitated to predict a miracle. Machines kept his body functioning, tubes and wires sprawled across his bed like a web of fragile hope, but the reality was stark. His survival hovered on the edge of impossibility. Jill stood at his bedside, her tears dripping onto his hand, whispering words that tumbled out in desperation, begging her son not to leave her. Every plea carried with it the weight of years' arguments, the reconciliations, the endless cycle of his mistakes and her forgiveness. And then, when hope was all but extinguished, a flicker stirred. Billy's fingers moved, the faintest tremor but undeniable, a physical reaction to his mother's cries. Jill gasped, her heart leaping into her throat, convinced she had witnessed a sign of defiance from the son who had always resisted giving up, even in the darkest of times. The doctors cautioned that such reflexes could be involuntary, nothing more than a trick of the nervous system. But Jill refused to believe it. To her, it was proof that somewhere inside, Billy still heard her, still fought to claw his way back to the surface. Jack tried to temper her expectations, speaking gently, urging her to trust the medical team, reminding her that miracles were rare but not impossible. Yet even as he attempted to steady Jill's spiraling emotions, his own faith was being tested. For Jack, watching Billy lie motionless, his life reduced to percentages and possibilities, was a torment that dredged up every ounce of guilt he carried about their relationship. Had he been too hard on him? Had he pushed him away at the times when Billy needed him most? And if this was truly the end, would those questions haunt him forever? As the minutes stretched into hours, the waiting room transformed into a crucible of faith, doubt, and desperation. Jill refused to leave, clutching at Billy's hand, whispering promises and pleas, her mind locked in a battle between fear and hope. Jack, pacing relentlessly, turned inward, offering prayers to a God he had long struggled to believe in, bargaining silently for his brother's life. Diane, standing slightly apart, watched the family unravel, her own heart heavy with the understanding that this accident would ripple far beyond the hospital walls. The scene was unbearable in its fragility. Machines beeped steadily, monitors flashed numbers that only the doctors fully understood, and somewhere in the sterile depths of the operating room, Billy Abbott waged the greatest battle of his life. His reputation as reckless, selfish, and destructive had long defined him, but now, stripped of ego and bravado, he was simply a man fighting to live. The slight movement of his fingers, whether reflex or intention, became the thread upon which Jill hung all her hope. For Jack, it was a reminder that even a sliver of life was worth clinging to, worth praying for, worth begging the universe not to take away. In that moment, time seemed to stand still. The odds were cruel, the doctors pragmatic, but the love surrounding Billy fierce, complicated, and unyielding filled the room with a defiance that numbers could not measure. And so they waited, torn between despair and determination, holding on to the faintest flicker that Billy Abbott, in true Billy fashion, might just cheat death one more time.